Mother-in-law, you are no longer at an age to understand these devices, Derek told me, snatching the cell phone from my hands in my own living room with a smile that turned my stomach. I am Eleanor. I am 72 years old, and I was widowed 5 years ago by a man who never raised his voice to me, nor treated me like a useless person. What my son-in-law did not know was that the phone he held with such arrogance was not my only connection to the bank, nor to my widow's pension. It was my only hidden fund. Everything had started a couple of hours earlier on what was supposed to be just an ordinary Sunday. Sunday routines in my house have been exactly the same for years. I wake up at 6 in the morning, brew a pot of black coffee, and sit on the back porch to watch the yard. Robert, my late husband, planted a lemon tree near the back fence the same year we got married. Now the tree is massive, casting shade over almost the entire lawn and forcing me to sweep up dry leaves every other day. That Sunday, the air was crisp. I took my time in the kitchen, pulled the beef out of the fridge, prepared the rub with garlic, parsley, and a little oil, and turned on the oven. I always liked having control of my kitchen. For 35 years, I was the treasurer of an agricultural co-op in the neighboring county. I managed the ledgers, the vendor payments, the deferred checks, and the payroll for 100 employees. Nobody told me how to run a double-entry column, nor how to balance a spreadsheet. But to Derek, my only daughter's husband, I was nothing more than an old woman who barely knew how to turn on the television. I heard the engine of Derek's truck parking in front of my house at 12 o'clock sharp. The roar of the engine always seemed excessive to me, like everything else about him. A vehicle far too big for someone who changes jobs every 2 years because his bosses just don't know how to appreciate his talent. Footsteps echoed on the sidewalk. The front door opened without a knock. Caroline, my daughter, has her own key. They walked in as if the wind had blown them inside. "Hi, Mom," Caroline called out from the hallway, using that high-pitched voice she gets when she's nervous or trying to cover up an uncomfortable silence. She appeared in the kitchen, dropping her purse on the clean table. She had deep, dark circles under her makeup and a slouched posture. Caroline was always a soft-spoken girl, but since she married Derek 10 years ago, her voice didn't just become soft, it became almost inaudible whenever he was in the same room. "How are you, sweetheart?" I asked, kissing her cheek. The smell of her floral perfume couldn't quite mask the stale scent of the truck's cabin. Before she could answer, Derek walked into the kitchen. He wore a plaid shirt that pulled a little too tight across his stomach, and that smug expression that never washes off his face. He didn't even greet me right away. He went straight for the refrigerator, swung it wide open, pulled out a bottle of cold mineral water, and drank straight from the neck. I just stood there, watching him with a dish towel in my hands. "It is so hot in this house, Eleanor," he finally said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "You should turn on the AC in the living room. At your age, heat stroke is dangerous." "The weather is lovely, Derek, and the windows are open," I replied in a neutral tone. I never gave him the satisfaction of getting under my skin. "Whatever you say," he muttered, waving off the conversation and walked into the dining room to turn on the television. He put on a sports channel, the volume loud enough that I could feel the vibration in the crystal glasses I had arranged in the china cabinet. Caroline lowered her eyes and started slicing some bread on the cutting board. "Don't pay attention to him, Mom. He had a rough week at the office. You know how he gets when deals don't close fast enough." "Funny how a difficult deal gives him such an appetite," I commented without raising my voice, adjusting the roasting pan of potatoes to slide it into the oven. "And you, how is the pharmacy?" Caroline is a shift manager at a chain pharmacy. She works 12 hours a day. She's the one who pays the rent on the apartment they live in, who covers the payments on Derek's massive truck, and who I assume keeps that household economy afloat while he chases investments that never quite materialize. "Good, just tired," she sighed, arranging the slices of bread in a wicker basket. "We did inventory on Thursday. My back is killing me. But Derek says he's about to close a deal with a cleaning supply vendor soon, and I won't have to work overtime anymore." I nodded in silence. I had been hearing the exact same promise about Derek's imminent deals since Christmas 5 years ago. I didn't say a word. Experience had taught me that criticizing Derek in front of Caroline only made her defend him harder, as if the dignity of her marriage depended on convincing her mother she hadn't picked the wrong man. Lunch dragged on with the usual tension dressed up as normalcy. I served the roast. Derek took the largest cut before I could even offer any to Caroline. He chewed with his mouth half open, talking over the blare of the television. "The economy is wrecked, Eleanor," he declared, pointing at me with his fork, a piece of meat stabbed on the end. "People don't know what to do with their money. The banks eat you alive with fees. You have to know how to maneuver." "I'm putting together a mutual fund with some partners right now. 20% monthly returns. A sure thing." "How interesting," I said, dryly, cutting my food into small, precise pieces. "Magic returns always end up being a headache." Derek let out a short, sharp laugh. "That's your generation's mindset, mother-in-law. With all due respect. Do you guys really think keeping money stuffed under the mattress or sitting in a savings account earning nothing is safe? The world changed. Everything is digital. You have to know how to use the platforms now." I looked at Caroline. She was pushing a piece of potato around her plate, never lifting her eyes. "I do quite well with my methods, Derek. I have no debts, I pay my taxes on time, and this house is paid for." That last sentence seemed to bother him. The house, the property Robert and I built brick by brick, a 4-bedroom home with a wide garden in a neighborhood that had skyrocketed in value over the years. Derek always looked at the walls of my house as if he were calculating the price per square foot. Sure, he conceded, wiping his mouth with the cloth napkin and leaving an obvious grease stain behind. "But let's be honest, the pension Robert left you barely covers basic expenses, and with inflation, that money is worth less every day. Caroline and I were just talking about that in the car." Caroline's fork hit her ceramic plate with a sharp clink. Her head snapped up, eyes wide. "Derek, we said we weren't going to talk about this right now," she whispered, panic bleeding into her voice. "Talk about what, sweetheart?" I asked, resting my silverware on the edges of my plate, crossing my hands in my lap. Derek didn't give Caroline time to explain. He leaned over the table, resting his heavy forearms near my water glass. "About your financial organization. Mother-in-law, Caroline worries. You live alone, you're getting up there in years. Bank apps change every single day. There are scams everywhere. Older folks losing everything because they click where they shouldn't. We want to help you." "I don't need help with my bank account. I go to the bank, I use the ATM. I pay my utility bills online. I have never had a problem." "Don't take offense, Eleanor, but the other day Caroline told me you forgot to pay your homeowner's insurance premium. She had to go pay it herself." I felt a cold pinch in my chest. I looked at my daughter. She shrank back into her chair. It was true that last month I had asked her to do me the favor of paying the insurance at a physical branch because the bank's system was down for maintenance, and I had a doctor's appointment at the exact same time. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was a specific favor I asked of her, and she had used it as ammunition to arm her husband. "I didn't forget, Caroline. I asked you to do it because I was at the doctor's office. I gave you the cash the night before." Caroline swallowed hard. "Yes, Mom, I know. I just mentioned it to Derek in passing." "It doesn't matter if you forgot or not," Derek interrupted, raising his voice to seize control of the conversation. "The point is, it's a mental load you shouldn't have to carry anymore. Caroline works too much. I am building my companies. We can't be running around plugging holes because of your absent-mindedness. I say this with nothing but love. The most logical thing is for me to manage your pension. You hand the account over to me. I handle the payments. I invest the surplus in my fund, and I transfer you a clean monthly allowance without you having to lift a finger." The silence that followed that proposal was thick, heavy, like the air right before a summer thunderstorm. The television in the background kept broadcasting the game, the roar of the stadium filling the dining room, but at our table, nobody breathed. I kept my eyes locked on Derek's. He stared back with that blind confidence of someone who is used to walking all over people without ever meeting resistance. It was the exact same confidence he used to isolate Caroline from her friends, the same confidence he used to convince her to sell her reliable little car to buy the truck he drives. "No," I said. Just a single clear syllable stripped of any decoration. Derek blinked, thrown off by the speed of the rejection. "Mother-in-law, you didn't even think about it." "There is nothing to think about. I appreciate the concern, but the money Robert left me and my pension are managed by me. If I ever lose my mind, I will sign a power of attorney over to my daughter, not to you." Derek's jaw tightened. A flush of red crept up the collar of his shirt. He looked at Caroline, waiting for her to step in on his behalf, But my daughter was petrified, staring at the breadcrumbs on the tablecloth as if they were a treasure map. "Fine," Derek said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Don't complain later when your savings melt away like ice, because you don't know how to invest." I stood up from the table and began clearing the plates in silence. The meal was over. The atmosphere was ruined as usual. I went to the kitchen, set the plates in the sink, and turned on the hot water. The steam fogged my glasses slightly. I took my time washing every fork, every dish, scrubbing with the sponge until every trace of grease was gone. I needed my hands to be busy. I needed to not say the brutal things crossing my mind. When I finished, I dried my hands and walked toward the living room. Derek was sprawled out on my three-seater sofa, legs stretched out, staring at his own phone. Caroline was in the dining room, still sitting there wiping the tablecloth with a damp rag in an almost robotic rhythm. I sat in my armchair, the one next to the window. I pulled my cell phone from the pocket of my kitchen apron. I needed to check the balance of my checking account. I wanted to make sure the electric bill had been properly deducted that Friday. I unlocked the screen and the apps popped up. The bank's icon, red and white, sat in the top right corner. I tapped it. The loading screen appeared. I adjusted my reading glasses. The app asked for my 6-digit passcode. I started typing slowly, making sure I didn't hit the wrong number. My up-close vision fails me sometimes, and touchscreens don't have the raised keys of the calculators I used to run at the co-op. Suddenly, a shadow fell over me. Derek had gotten up from the couch without me hearing him. He stood right beside me, looking down at my phone screen from above. "What are you doing, mother-in-law? Fighting with technology?" he asked, his tone dripping with mockery. He didn't even try to hide. "I am checking a payment. If you'll excuse me, I need to concentrate." "Here, let me help you. You're taking forever." Before I could react, before I could pull the phone out of his reach, Derek reached down and snatched the cell phone right out of my fingers. The movement was fast, violent, completely violating my personal space. I felt the rough scrape of his knuckles against my hand. I froze. I looked up. He took 2 steps back, holding my phone high, staring at the glowing screen. "Derek!" Caroline cried out from the dining room, appearing in the doorway. "What are you doing? Give my mom her phone back." "Relax, Caro. I'm just showing her how easy this is." "Look, mother-in-law, you were typing the passcode wrong here. That's why it locks you out." "Give me back my phone right now," I said. My voice came out low without a tremor, but carrying a firmness that left no room for debate. Derek ignored me. His thumbs flew across the screen of my cell phone. "Mother-in-law, you are no longer at an age to understand these devices," he said, letting out a loud, booming laugh that echoed off the walls of my living room. A raw, humiliating laugh. "I'll manage your pension starting today. It's for your own good. Look, I'm already inside your account." My stomach knotted up, not from the fear of losing the money, but from the invasion, from the absolute lack of respect in my own home. From the way this man who had built absolutely nothing in his life felt entitled to take my things by force. "Derek, please," Caroline begged, walking up to him and tugging on his shirt sleeve. "Give it to her. Mom is going to get mad." He shook off his wife's grip with a sharp flick of his arm. "Don't be annoying, Caroline. I'm setting this up. I'm going to link her account to my fund management app. That way I can monitor the transactions from my phone. It's fast. A couple of test transfers to confirm the link and we're done. You're going to forget what it's like having to go to the ATM to pull out dirty bills, Eleanor. I'll bring you whatever cash you need for the grocery store every week, like an allowance." The word allowance hung in the living room air. He was reducing me to a child. He was stripping away my autonomy right to my face, hiding behind a supposed modernity that I supposedly couldn't grasp. I stayed quiet, absolutely still in my armchair. That is how I operate. My personality was never about screaming or throwing tantrums or smashing plates against the wall. When I worked at the co-op and discovered a vendor was inflating prices, I didn't call him up to hurl insults. I let him deliver the goods, signed the receipt, and then blocked all his future payments, notifying the bank of the fraud with a stack of supporting documents. The vendor only found out he was ruined when he tried to cash the check. Silence is a much sharper weapon than noise. I watched Derek. He was completely absorbed by the screen. His brow was furrowed in concentration as he navigated the menus of my bank account. He saw my balance. He saw the deposits of my pension, but he didn't see everything. Because the app Derek was looking at, the one linked to my everyday phone number, only held the account where the state deposited my widow's pension every month, an account I kept at the bare minimum needed for daily expenses. What my son-in-law didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that 15 years ago, Robert and I had opened an account at a completely different bank in my name only. An account where we deposited the money from selling a plot of land on the outskirts of town, my entire life's savings from the co-op, and Robert's life insurance policies. That account had no app on this phone. That account wasn't meant to be touched by just anyone. "How kind of you, Derek," I finally said. My tone was so flat, so devoid of emotion that Caroline looked at me in terror. She expected me to explode. Seeing me this calm only made the panic in her eyes grow. Derek looked up from the cell phone for a second, smiling smugly. "See? Talking it out works. People understand each other. I already changed your login password for security. I put one in that I can remember. If you need to make a payment, let me know. I'll handle it." He placed the phone face down on the coffee table, like a teacher confiscating a dangerous toy. Then he rubbed his hands together and walked back toward the dining room. "All right, I'm going to take a nap in the guest room for a bit. That food made me sleepy. Caro, make me a coffee for when I wake up." And he left. He simply turned around and walked down the hallway toward the bedrooms, shutting the door behind him with a dull thud. Caroline stood frozen in the middle of the living room, staring at the phone on the coffee table. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were brimming with unshed tears. "Mom, I didn't know he was going to do that. I swear to you. We were just talking in the car about prices going up, and he said he wanted to help you." I didn't move from my chair. I looked my daughter up and down. I saw the tension in her shoulders, the way she wrung her hands. It broke my heart to see her like this, reduced to the shadow of a mediocre man. But my pain for her wasn't going to stop what I had to do. Love doesn't mean permitting abuse. And this afternoon, Derek had crossed a line that empty apologies could never erase. "It's all right, Caroline. Go make your husband's coffee." "Mom, aren't you mad?" "No, sweetheart, I am not mad. Go to the kitchen." Caroline nodded slowly, flooded with relief that she didn't have to face an argument, and retreated into the kitchen. I heard the sound of the metal kettle filling with water. I heard the click of the stove lighter. I stood up from the armchair in total silence. I didn't touch the cell phone Derek had left on the coffee table. It was useless to me now. He had changed the passcode, he had linked the account, he had claimed ownership of that device. He could keep it. I walked to my bedroom. The house had sunk into a strange quiet, broken only by the distant murmur of the television and the water boiling in the kitchen. I stepped into my room and opened the heavy oak wardrobe. On the top shelf, tucked behind winter blankets that smelled of mothballs, sat an old shoebox. I pulled it down. Inside were my vital documents. I took out my original ID card. I took out a gold debit card that I never carried in my everyday purse. And I took out a hardcover notebook where I wrote absolutely everything down. I went to the coat rack and took down my gray wool coat. I slipped it on slowly, buttoning each button with precision. I grabbed my black leather handbag, slipped the documents inside, and slung the strap over my shoulder. I walked out of the bedroom and down the hallway. Passing the kitchen, I saw Caroline's back as she poured the coffee into a mug. I didn't stop to say goodbye. There was nothing left to say to her. At that moment, I reached the front door, gripped the cold brass handle, and turned the lock softly so the mechanism wouldn't make a sound. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind me, making sure the latch clicked perfectly into place. The afternoon sun hit my face. I breathed in the crisp Sunday air. It was 2 in the afternoon. The main branch of my bank, the one down on Central Avenue, has an automated service lobby and self-service terminals that run 24 hours a day. But more importantly, I had the direct phone number of the commercial branch manager, a man who had known Robert and who had known my financial history for 2 decades. And if there was one thing a former treasurer knew how to do perfectly, it was how to lock down a system before a thief could take their first step. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder and started walking toward the avenue with a steady stride, never looking back. An hour from now, I was going to be sitting in front of a banking terminal. And when my son-in-law woke up from his nap and tried to open that app to steal what was mine, he was going to find a surprise he wouldn't forget for the rest of his life. The afternoon wind hit my face the second I crossed the gate of my front yard, but I didn't stop to button my coat until I was half a block away. The sidewalk pavement was littered with the dry leaves the sycamore trees drop this time of year, and the sound of my own footsteps crunching over them was the only thing breaking the Sunday silence. At 72, I have learned that rushing is the first mistake of the desperate. I wasn't desperate. I was executing a procedure. I walked down Main Street, my eyes locked on the corner ahead. I kept the black bag pressed tight against my body, feeling the comforting weight of the hardcover notebook against my ribs. Back in my day, as the treasurer of the co-op, I faced droughts that ruined entire harvests, trucker strikes that threatened to let merchandise rot in the warehouses, and vendors who tried to slip through duplicate invoices, taking advantage of the chaos. I never solved a single problem by raising my voice. Problems are solved by cutting off the flow of money. And Derek, with his tight shirt and the arrogance of a man who has never broken a sweat to earn $1, had just stuck his hand into the wrong cash register. When I reached the corner of the main avenue, I saw that Arthur's newsstand and convenience store was open. Arthur is a man my age, a widower too, who worked as a dispatcher at that same agricultural co-op for 20 years before opening his own business. He was organizing some bags of coffee on the front rack when he saw me walk by. "Good afternoon, Miss Eleanor," he greeted me, resting his newspaper ink-stained hands on the metal counter. "What a miracle, seeing you out walking on a Sunday at this hour. Isn't your daughter visiting? I saw your son-in-law's truck parked in front of your house." I approached the counter slowly. The smell of sweet tobacco and printed paper brought back memories of the mornings Robert used to drop by to buy the paper before heading to the garage. "Good afternoon, Arthur. Yes, they are at the house. Derek is taking a nap. I just needed some fresh air." Arthur let out a dry, humorless chuckle and shook his head as he wiped down the candy display glass with a rag. "That boy has a talent for resting that I wish I had. He came by here an hour ago, right before lunch. Came to buy 2 packs of expensive cigarettes and an energy drink." "I imagine he paid in cash," I said in a neutral tone, even though I already knew the answer. Arthur dropped the rag on the counter and looked me in the eye, lowering his voice out of pure instinct, even though there was no one else on the street. "He told me to put it on his tab, Miss Eleanor. On your tab, I mean. He threw me some excuse about leaving his wallet in the glove box of his truck and not wanting to walk back. I gave them to him because, well, he is Caroline's husband, and I didn't want to disrespect you." I felt a cold pressure at the base of my neck. It wasn't about the money for the cigarettes. It was the absolute naturalness with which Derek used my name to cover his minor vices. The exact same naturalness with which, minutes later, he would seize my phone in my own living room. I opened my black bag, pulled out my worn leather wallet, and extracted a few high-denomination bills. I placed them on the metal counter, sliding them forward with my index finger until they sat right in front of Arthur's hands. "Cover today's charge with this, Arthur. And listen to me very carefully," I said, keeping my voice low, but carrying a clarity that allowed no argument. "From this moment on, my tab at this store is closed to anyone who isn't me. If Derek ever tries to put something on credit again, tell him I spoke with you and strictly forbade you from extending him credit in my name. If he gets mad, tell him to come take it up with me." Arthur took the bills, slowly nodding his head. He knew that tone of mine. He had heard it plenty of times at the co-op board meetings. "Understood, Eleanor. Don't worry, I won't spot him so much as a piece of candy." "Keep the change, please." "Thank you, Arthur. Have a good afternoon." I resumed my walk down the avenue. I was 3 blocks away from the bank branch. The sun beat down heavy on the gray sidewalks, but I didn't feel the heat. My mind was running through the architecture of the banking system that handled my pension. Derek had made a monumental miscalculation. He believed technology was the exclusive territory of the young, a language that old people could only stare at with fear and confusion. He was completely ignorant of the fact that the computer systems running these banks were designed, structured, and approved by people of my generation. The interfaces change, they get more colorful, and you use them by tapping a glass screen. But the underlying logic, the lockdown rules, the security protocols, and the audit trails are exactly the same ones I applied to the co-op's general ledgers 30 years ago. I reached the facade of the bank. The tinted glass doors to the main lobby were closed to the public, but the vestibule housing the ATMs and self-service kiosks was open. I pushed the heavy glass door, which gave way with a metallic hum, and stepped inside. The temperature drop was immediate. The air conditioning was blasting, leaving the room freezing and smelling faintly of ozone and floor wax. There was no one else in the lobby. The 4 machines were open, their green lights blinking in the controlled dimness of the room. I walked to the machine on the far right. It was the most advanced terminal, the one that allowed you to handle complex transactions without needing a human teller. I stood in front of the screen, pulled the gold debit card from my bag, the one Derek had never seen in his life, and slid it into the glowing slot. The machine swallowed it with a sharp mechanical clack. The screen asked for my 4-digit PIN. I punched it in firmly, covering the keypad with my left hand out of pure professional habit. The main menu unfolded before me. I ignored the cash withdrawal options and went straight to the linked accounts management panel. My primary account, the one holding a lifetime of savings and the money from the sale of Robert's land, appeared on the screen with its balance untouched, a number that would have given Derek a heart attack of pure greed if he ever laid eyes on it. But that account wasn't my target. I navigated through the menu until I reached the secondary accounts under the same account holder. There it was, the checking account where the state deposited my widow's pension every first Friday of the month. I tapped the screen to view the latest transactions for that specific account. The list loaded in a second. My breath hitched for a fraction of a second. There it was. At 1:45 p.m., barely 15 minutes after snatching the cell phone from my hands, Derek had initiated an outgoing transfer of $10. The transaction description read, "External Digital Wallet Link." The recipient was an account under the name Derek Vance, hosted on one of those trendy financial apps that promise magic returns and operate just outside the strict oversight of the Federal Reserve. He wasn't joking. He really had configured his phone to drain my account. That $10 transfer was the bridge. Once he confirmed the money reached its destination without bouncing back, the next logical step would be to transfer the entirety of my monthly pension into his investment fund. And knowing his nap schedule, he would probably do it the second he woke up. Confident that I was sitting on my living room sofa crying over my own uselessness, I didn't withdraw the money. Pulling the cash out and hiding it in my house would have been a defensive maneuver, a way to brace for the hit. I wasn't there to defend myself. I was there to snap the trap shut. I pulled the gold card from the slot, tucked it back into my wallet, and walked over to the wooden bench pushed against the glass wall, safely out of reach of the ATM security cameras. I sat down, rested the bag on my knees, and pulled out my hardcover notebook. I flipped through the handwritten pages until I found the letter R. Richard Vance, branch manager. I've known Richard since he was a fresh-faced college grad who took a job as an account officer at the bank in the neighboring town. I was the one who taught him how to read the co-op's agricultural balance sheets so the bank would approve our credit lines for new tractors. Today, Richard wears tailored suits and has a glass-walled office on the top floor of this very building. But he never forgot who helped him close his first major deals. I pulled an old cell phone out of my bag. It wasn't a modern smartphone with a touchscreen. It was one of those small, rugged black bricks with physical keys good for nothing but making and receiving calls. I bought it years ago to have a dedicated emergency line for Robert's family out of state, and nobody, not even Caroline, remembered I had it. I dialed Richard's personal number. It rang 3 times before the line opened. In the background, I heard the typical noise of a family Sunday, kids laughing, a dog barking, and the metallic clatter of a barbecue grill. "Hello," Richard said. His voice sounded relaxed, completely different from the formal tone he used Monday through Friday. "Richard, it's Eleanor. I am so sorry to interrupt your Sunday." There was a second of silence on the line, followed by the sound of footsteps walking away from the background noise. When Richard spoke again, the racket was gone. He had stepped away to somewhere quiet. He knew that if I was calling his personal cell on a Sunday, it wasn't to wish him a happy birthday. "Eleanor, please, it's no interruption at all. What a surprise to hear from you. Has something serious happened? Are you doing all right, health-wise?" "My health is perfect, Richard. I'm calling about a banking irregularity. I need you to log into the system from your contingency computer. I heard the jingle of keys and the click of a door shutting. Tell me what happened, Eleanor. I'm listening. My son-in-law, Derek Vance, physically took my personal cell phone from me an hour ago in my own home. He changed the password to my banking app without my consent. I just checked my transaction history at the self-service terminal, and I see he made a $10 test transfer to link my pension account to a digital wallet in his name. He intends to manage my pension against my will. Richard let out a curse under his breath, a heavy word he quickly tried to cover up by clearing his throat. That bastard. Pardon my language, Eleanor, but that is a serious federal crime. Do you want me to freeze the pension account so he can't move a single dime? I can do it in 2 minutes. I kept my eyes locked on the empty street through the bank's glass wall. No, Richard. Freezing my account only stops the bleeding temporarily. Tomorrow he could force my daughter to come down to the branch with some excuse. I need you to trigger the security protocol for digital identity theft. Level 3. Dead silence fell over the line. I could only hear Richard breathing. He knew exactly what I was talking about. Level 3 wasn't a simple preventative freeze. It was a weaponized tool designed by the fraud department to neutralize entire networks of scammers. Eleanor, if I trigger a Level 3 fraud alert, the system won't just freeze your pension account. The algorithm traces the IP address and the digital footprint of the device that initiated the test transfer. Your son-in-law's phone will be flagged in the National Banking Database as a device used for phishing and elder financial abuse. I know, I replied, my voice flat, completely devoid of doubt. That means, Richard continued, shifting into a strictly professional tone, that as an automatic security measure, the Federal Reserve will mandate the preventative freezing of all accounts, credit cards, and digital wallets installed on that device, or linked to the name Derek Vance. He will be financially paralyzed. He won't be able to buy a cup of coffee with a card until he physically shows up with an attorney to explain why he tried to hijack a pensioner's account. That sounds like an excellent security measure for the times we live in, Richard. The world changed. Everything is digital. You have to know how to use the platforms now, like my son-in-law says. Richard let out a short, almost imperceptible laugh, heavy with dark respect. You are still the exact same strategist you always were, Eleanor. Give me 5 minutes. I'm booting up the terminal I have in my home office. I will report the event as a red alert cybersecurity breach detected by internal monitoring. You don't have to do anything else. I appreciate this immensely, Richard. I'll drop by your office on Tuesday and bring you a jar of those canned peaches you like. Not necessary, Eleanor. It's my job to protect our clients. In 5 minutes, that boy's phone is going to turn into a very expensive paperweight. Take good care of yourself. I ended the call. I dropped the old phone into the bottom of my bag, right next to the notebook and the documents. I stood up from the wooden bench, smoothed the wrinkles from my gray coat, and walked out of the branch. The warm afternoon air wrapped around me again. It was 3:15 p.m. Derek's nap was about to end. I decided not to head straight back. I walked 2 more blocks to the bakery by the town square, which always opens on Sunday afternoons. There was a short line. I waited my turn patiently, watching the kids play on the park swings. When my turn came, I ordered a fresh baguette and half a dozen butter croissants. I paid in cash, took the brown paper bag that radiated a comforting warmth, and started the walk back home. I needed to walk in carrying something completely ordinary. Normalcy is the best camouflage for devastation. The walk back felt shorter. As I got closer to my street, I noticed that the front door of my house, the very same one I had shut with such care, was cracked open. I stepped up the 2 porch stairs without making a sound. I pushed the wooden door. The atmosphere in the living room was radically different from what I had left behind. The heavy calm of a Sunday digestion was gone, replaced by crackling electric tension. Derek was standing in the middle of the dining room, pacing in short circles like a caged animal. His shirt collar was unbuttoned, and his face was flushed red, beaded with a cold sweat that had nothing to do with the weather. He was gripping his own cell phone in his right hand, jabbing the screen with his index finger so hard it looked like he was about to shatter the glass. Caroline was sitting on the edge of one of the dining chairs, her hands clenched between her knees, crying silently. Her makeup was smeared, carving 2 dark tracks beneath her eyes. I stepped into the hallway, shut the door behind me with an audible click, and walked toward the table. I set the bag of bread on the clean tablecloth with absolute deliberate slowness. Derek stopped dead when he heard me. He snapped his head up and pinned me with a glare loaded with fury and bewilderment. "Eleanor," he yelled, taking 2 quick steps toward me, closing the distance in a threatening lunge. "Where the hell did you go?" I took off my gray coat with slow movements, folding the garment over the back of my chair before answering. I looked him dead in the eye without stepping back a single millimeter. "I went for a walk. Derek and I stopped by the bakery. I thought you two might like some fresh pastries with your coffee when you woke up from your nap. Did you sleep well?" My son-in-law's jaw clenched so tight, the muscles in his face began to tremble. He raised his phone and pointed the glowing screen at me, though I didn't need to see it to know what it said. "Don't play dumb with me, mother-in-law. What did you do? Who did you call?" "I don't understand you, Derek. What are you referring to?" I asked, using a tone of flawless courtesy, the exact tone he hated because it gave him no sharp edges to grab onto for a fight. "My app," he roared, waving the device in the air. I woke up, tried to log into my account to check on some investments, and the system kicked me out. It's telling me my user profile is locked for security reasons. I thought it was a network error. I tried opening the other app, the one with my savings, and it's locked too. I looked at Caroline. She sobbed, covering her mouth with her hand. "Mom, Derek tried to pay his truck insurance premium from his phone, and a red banner popped up. It says all his accounts are frozen." I turned my attention back to Derek. I tilted my head slightly, feigning maternal concern. "How awful, Derek. You were just telling me at lunch that there are scams everywhere. You probably clicked somewhere you shouldn't have. These modern apps are very treacherous. Sometimes you touch the wrong button and you lose everything." "I didn't touch the wrong button," he screamed, completely losing his composure, his voice pitching high with desperation. "I called the bank's automated line. The machine told me my cards were disabled because of a fraud protocol detected on my device." Fraud, Eleanor. Me. He ran his free hand through his hair, messing it up. Panic was starting to win out over his rage. A man who lives on appearances and moving other people's money around is absolutely nothing without access to his accounts. "I have nothing to do with your business, Derek. You are the financial expert of this house, aren't you? You're the one who manages the funds, the one who knows how to maneuver. I'm sure you'll be able to fix it first thing tomorrow." Derek gritted his teeth. He took another step toward me, invading my space, trying to use his size to intimidate me, exactly as he had done when he ripped the cell phone out of my hands hours ago. "Did you do something?" he hissed, dropping his voice to a menacing growl. "You left this house, and you went to do something. I saw the test transfer. It went through perfectly. The account was linked, and half an hour later my phone turns into a dead zone. You called the bank and reported me." I didn't flinch. I kept my arms relaxed at my sides. The smell of warm bread filled the space between us, an absurd contrast to the violence bottled up in that room. "I didn't report anyone, Derek. I do not have the power to freeze your personal accounts. I'm just an old woman who barely knows how to turn on the television, remember?" He stood paralyzed. My own words, the ones he used to humiliate me, were bouncing back at him like a ruthless mirror. He opened his mouth to scream at me again, but the shrill ring of the landline phone interrupted him. The old phone, hanging on the kitchen wall, started to ring with its sharp, mechanical chime. Caroline jumped in her chair. Derek snapped his head toward the kitchen, eyes wide. Nobody called the landline on a Sunday afternoon, unless it was an emergency. I walked slowly toward the kitchen, brushing past Derek without even grazing him. I pulled the receiver off the hook and brought it to my ear. "Hello," I said. "Eleanor, it's Richard," the manager's voice said, sounding entirely professional now. "Apologies for bothering you again. I was just calling to confirm that the cybersecurity department has already issued the automated report." "I'm listening, Richard." Derek stepped into the kitchen doorway, holding his breath as he listened to my side of the conversation. "The usurpation attempt was logged," Richard explained. "The system detected that from the mobile device belonging to Derek Vance, an attempt was made to drain a retirement pension account. Since this is a federal offense, The bank has already forwarded the automated report to the district attorney's office for attempted financial fraud against a senior citizen. I'm letting you know so you're prepared if they contact you to ratify the complaint. I felt a profound tranquility settle into my chest. The machinery was in motion, and there was no human way to stop it now. I understand perfectly. I appreciate your diligence. Good afternoon. I hung up the receiver, dropping it into the cradle with a sharp clack. I turned around. Derek was standing in the doorway, his face pale, drained of every last drop of color. "Who was that, Eleanor?" he asked. His voice had zero arrogance left. There was only the raw fear of a man who has just stepped on a landmine. I looked him up and down, taking in his sweaty shirt, his useless phone in his hand, his defeated posture. "It was the bank's automated system, Derek," I said with an irony so dry it practically cut the air. "It seems the technology detected an attempted robbery against a pensioner from a phone registered in your name. And you know how these modern platforms are. Once they flag you as a scammer, there is no turning back." Derek took a step back as if my words had physically punched him in the center of his chest. His eyes, which always looked down at me with that mix of chronic boredom and disdain, were now bulging locked onto my face, searching for some sign that this was all a sick joke. But I don't joke about money, and much less about mine. The silence that took over the kitchen was absolute, so heavy that the hum of the old refrigerator sounded like an airplane engine. My son-in-law's face went from extreme pallor to a splotchy, irregular red, the classic color of blood pressure spiking from panic. He lifted his useless phone, stared at it as if the device had betrayed him, and then pointed his index finger at me. The nail on his finger was shaking slightly. "You are crazy," he said, his voice cracking hoarse, shedding the entire fake persona of a businessman. "You don't understand what you just did. It's a system error. It has to be a system error. I didn't steal anything from you." I didn't move from my spot by the counter. I took the brown paper bag holding the baguette and the pastries. I folded the top over so the heat wouldn't escape and set it down on the cutting board. My movements were slow, deliberate. I wanted him to see that his desperation didn't alter my pulse in the slightest. "The system doesn't make mistakes when it traces where an order comes from, Derek," I replied, using the same monotone voice I used at the co-op to read the annual balance sheets. "You took my phone, you changed my security passcode, you linked my account to your digital wallet, and you made a test transfer. All of that leaves an indelible digital footprint. The bank simply put two and two together." "It was to manage your payments," he screamed, swatting at the air. "I told you in the living room. I warned you I was going to do it." Caroline, who had remained petrified in the dining chair, stood up slowly. She walked toward the kitchen threshold, dragging her feet as if she suddenly weighed 200 pounds. Her makeup was streaked, leaving dark trails under her eyes, and she had the hollow stare of someone who has just watched a load-bearing wall collapse inside her own house. "Derek," my daughter murmured, her voice a thin thread, barely audible over the fridge. "You were going to take my mom's money. You were going to drain her pension account." He spun toward her violently, looking for a life raft, someone to manipulate. "No, Caroline, for the love of God," he pleaded, stepping toward her with his hands open in a gesture of fake begging. "I was going to invest it, I swear to you. There's an investment fund closing first thing tomorrow morning. I needed liquidity to get into the pool. It was a temporary bridge. In 15 days, I was going to return the capital to your mother with 20% profit. It was for us, Caro, to pay the late installments on the truck." Hearing the phrase temporary bridge, my mind inevitably traveled back to the past, dragged down by the weight of a memory I had kept locked away for 5 years. It was exactly in November on a Tuesday afternoon. Caroline had shown up at my house crying, her eyes swollen, holding the keys to her little compact car in her hand. Derek had convinced her to sell her car, the one she had bought herself with her first savings from the pharmacy, to use that money as a temporary bridge to get the high-end truck he drove today. I sat with her in this very kitchen, brewed coffee, and listened to her justify it. "Mom, it's just that Derek needs a representative vehicle for his client meetings. He promised me that in 6 months he'd buy me a brand new car with his commissions." 5 years had passed. Caroline rode the bus 2 hours every single day to get to the pharmacy, enduring the freezing winter and the suffocating summer heat, while Derek paraded his truck downtown. That afternoon, as I dried my daughter's tears with a paper napkin, I knew the man sleeping in her bed was a professional parasite. I didn't say anything to Caroline, so I wouldn't push her further toward him. But the very next day, first thing in the morning, I went to the bank and opened the secret account. I knew the parasite, sooner or later, was going to try and feed on me. The gold card was born from that memory, from the sight of my daughter crying over a car she never got back. I snapped back to the present. Caroline was looking at her husband as if he were a stranger. The sound of his own excuse seemed to have ripped a veil from my daughter's mind. "The late installments on the truck," Caroline repeated, furrowing her brow. "Derek, you told me the truck was fully paid up to date. You asked me for half my paycheck last month, specifically to pay the insurance and the registration." Derek's face fell apart. The lie had crashed head-on into reality at the worst possible moment. "A deal got complicated, Caroline," he exploded, losing his temper entirely, pointing at her with rage. "You don't understand anything about finance. That's why we are where we are. If your mother wasn't a hysterical, paranoid old woman, tomorrow we'd have that money multiplied. But no, the lady prefers to call the bank and ruin my life." He took massive strides toward the landline hanging on the wall right beside me. I stepped aside, yielding the space with icy courtesy. Derek yanked the receiver off the hook violently, nearly ripping the cord from the base, and started dialing the bank's customer service number, the 1-800 number printed on the back of all their cards. He jammed the plastic against his ear, breathing through his mouth, sweating buckets. The plaid shirt clung to his back in dark patches. The receiver's speaker was loud enough that Caroline and I could clearly hear the metallic, pre-recorded voice of the automated system. "Welcome to the telephone service network. Please enter your social security number followed by the pound key." Derek punched the numbers in with fury. There was a 3-second pause. Elevator music played briefly, followed by a sharp click. "We regret to inform you that your social security number is currently under a preventative hold by order of the Federal Reserve's Cybersecurity and Fraud Compliance Department. All linked accounts, credit cards, debit cards, and investment profiles have been frozen under a Level 3 protocol. Please visit your nearest branch during regular business hours with legal representation. Thank you for calling." The call disconnected itself. The dead dial tone filled the kitchen. Derek froze with the receiver glued to his ear. The auditory confirmation of the disaster had destroyed his final hope that I was lying. His financial world, the house of cards he had built with lies, unpaid loans, and other people's money, had just been demolished by a banking security algorithm. He hung up the phone slowly. He didn't look at me. He looked down at his own hands, the same hands that hours earlier had snatched my cell phone with such arrogance. The image of his shock, of his disbelief in the face of a system he couldn't manipulate, with screaming, brought me the second memory of the afternoon, a direct flashback to my years as treasurer at the agricultural co-op. A decade ago, there was a contractor, a massive man named Frank, who was in charge of transporting grain from the silos to the port. Frank had a habit of inflating the mileage on his freight slips. When I caught the discrepancy, I didn't go out to the loading yard to fight him. I simply adjusted the monthly payment system, deducted every stolen dollar, and locked out his vendor account. Frank came kicking down my office door, screaming profanities, threatening me with million-dollar lawsuits and ruining my reputation. I remember looking at him over the rim of my reading glasses, exactly the way I was looking at Derek now, and sliding the general ledger across the desk. "Sink me with my own numbers if you can, Frank," I told him. The contractor ended up in federal prison for tax fraud 2 years later. Loud men always underestimate the power of silence and perfect documentation. They think fear is the only currency, never understanding that precision is far more lethal. "My cards," Derek muttered, talking to himself. "The automatic withdrawal for the rent, the health insurance, the crypto apps. It's all in my name, it's all linked to that phone." He spun toward me. The fury was gone, replaced by absolute panic, the raw terror of an animal that feels the steel trap snapping shut on its leg. "Eleanor, please," he said. It was the first time in 10 years I had ever heard him say the word please without a sarcastic tone. "You have to call that manager Richard. You know him. Call him right now. Tell him it was a mix-up, that we were just playing around, that I was setting up your account with your permission, and the system misinterpreted the transaction. I stared at him, folding my hands over the apron I still hadn't taken off. The system doesn't misinterpret, Derek. The system records facts. And the fact is that you took my phone by force, you changed my security code, and you transferred money into your account. That is not a game. That is called theft. But I didn't take anything. It was $10 miserable, he screamed, desperation, making him lose his pleading tone. You can't ruin my life over $10. I am not ruining your life over $10. I am stopping you before you ruin mine over my entire life savings. I'll give you the phone back. Here, take it. He reached into his pants pocket, pulled out my cell phone, and slammed it down onto the kitchen table with a dull thud. The device that hours ago was his trophy was now burning his hands. I don't want it, Derek. It's no use to me anymore. The line is compromised. Tomorrow I'll go buy another one with a new number. Caroline took a step forward. Her eyes were locked on the phone sitting on the table. Mom, my daughter started to say, but her voice broke. She rubbed her arms as if she were cold, even though the kitchen was warm from the afternoon sun pouring through the window. If Derek's accounts are locked, we aren't going to be able to pay the rent on the apartment this week. They're going to evict us. That was the low blow, the human shield. Derek always used Caroline as a containment barrier whenever his businesses failed. If he was going down, he made sure to drag her down with him, so everyone else would feel sorry for her and forgive him by extension. I looked at my daughter with deep sadness, but I didn't let my posture waver. Affectionate firmness is the only cure for willful blindness. The lease on your apartment is in your name, Caroline. You have your own payroll account at the pharmacy. You earn your own money, working 12 hours a day. If you stop paying the installments on your husband's truck, you'll have more than enough money left over to pay the rent. Derek let out a hysterical laugh, grabbing his head, pulling at his hair violently. Right. That was your plan from the very beginning, he bellowed, pacing in tight circles in the small kitchen. You always hated me. You always wanted to separate me from Caroline. You found the perfect excuse to leave me out on the street and turn my wife against me. You are a snake, Eleanor. A snake disguised as a helpless grandmother. The third memory assaulted me in that very instant. It wasn't a distant memory, but one from just a few hours ago. That very morning, early Sunday, I was sweeping the leaves from the lemon tree in the backyard. Robert had planted that tree. Robert, a man who worked from sunup to sundown in his auto shop, who came home with hands black from grease, but who never touched a single cent of my co-op salary because he said a woman's work is sacred and it belongs to her. Robert taught me how to drive. He taught me how to change a tire. He taught me that respect isn't demanded, it is built. I remembered the way Derek had walked into my house today without knocking, opening the fridge like he owned the place, complaining about the heat, demanding the AC, cranking up the TV volume until my crystal glasses shook. I remembered the word allowance. He had offered me an allowance out of my own money. The humiliation was not an accident. It was a method. And against a method of destruction. Only a method of defense works. I don't hate you, Derek, I replied with a calm so absolute it seemed to throw him off more than an insult ever could. Hate requires a lot of energy, and at my age, I prefer to spend my energy taking care of my plants. I am simply defending myself. You walked into my house thinking I was an old piece of furniture whose drawers you could empty out. You were wrong. You are going to call the bank, he demanded, slamming his closed fist onto the granite counter. The coffee cups Caroline had poured hours ago rattled in their saucers. You are going to call, and you are going to drop the charges, or I swear to God I will sue you for defamation. I have lawyers. I have contacts. Your lawyers charge a fee, Derek, and you have no way to pay them for so much as an initial consultation because your accounts are frozen. And as for your contacts, I highly doubt they'll want to get involved in a federal investigation for defrauding a widow. Derek opened his mouth to reply, but no sound came out. He realized in a fraction of a second the perfect trap he had walked into out of pure arrogance. He had no cash because I had cut off his credit at Arthur's store. He had no access to his cards, no access to his digital savings. He was a financially dead man, and the key to the padlock was held by the woman he had just called useless. He took a deep breath, trying to shift his strategy. Aggression hadn't worked. Panic hadn't either. He tried pity. Eleanor, listen to me. If this moves forward to the district attorney, they are going to indict me. They could give me pretrial detention for flight risk or obstruction. You don't want to see your daughter's husband in jail, do you? Do it for Caro. Look at her. You are destroying her. I turned my head toward Caroline. My daughter was leaning against the doorframe, crying silently, thick tears wetting her chin. But she wasn't crying out of fear. She was crying out of sheer exhaustion. The exhaustion of holding up a coward for 10 years. I walked over to her, stopped, inches away, reached out and stroked her cheek, wiping away a tear with my thumb. Sweetheart, I told her, using the soft tone I used when she was a little girl and fell off her bike. For 10 years, I have watched you shrink yourself. I have watched you lower your voice, cut your expenses, sell your things, and work until your back aches, all to maintain the illusion that he is a successful businessman. I am not destroying him. He destroyed himself when he decided to cross the line of legality. The question you have to ask yourself today isn't what I am going to do. The question is, what are you going to do tomorrow when the police come looking for the phone he used to try and steal your mother's pension? Caroline closed her eyes and let out a choked sob. She nodded her head slowly, an almost imperceptible movement, but one loaded with crushing meaning. She was waking up. The pain was immense, but it was the pain of the cure, not of the disease. Derek saw that nod. He watched as his wife, his safety net, his personal ATM slipped right through his fingers. You are both crazy, he roared, backing out into the hallway, tripping over a dining chair. You both deserve to end up alone. I'm leaving this house. I'm going to find my lawyer, and when I come back, I am going to leave you both out on the street. He turned around and took clumsy, massive strides down the hall. I heard the sound of his shoes hitting the wood, followed by the front door opening and slamming shut with a bang that rattled the picture frames on the walls. A second later, the engine of his massive truck roared out on the street. The tires screeched against the asphalt as he sped off, fleeing his own disaster, convinced he could still find an exit out there on the Sunday streets. Caroline and I were left alone in the house. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't a tense silence. It was the clean silence that remains after a storm passes through and washes away the accumulated garbage. My daughter wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at me with bloodshot eyes. He left, Mom. He left to burn gas he isn't going to be able to pay for when he has to fill the tank. Caroline. I walked back to the counter. I took the brown paper bag and pulled out the baguette, still warm, and the butter croissants. I arranged them in a wicker bread basket. Then I took the 2 cold cups of coffee sitting on the counter, poured the contents down the sink, and turned on the faucet to rinse them out. Sit down, sweetheart, I instructed, pointing to the kitchen chair. I'm going to brew fresh coffee. Do you need to eat something? Caroline obeyed. She sat at the table, resting her elbows on the wood, staring at the bread basket as if it were a magical object. While I filled the metal kettle with water and turned on the stove burner, I looked out the kitchen window. The sun was already dipping behind the treetops in the backyard. The lemon tree cast a long, dark shadow over the grass. The afternoon was coming to an end. I knew perfectly well that Derek's escape was nothing but the flailing of a drowning man. He wasn't going to find any lawyer willing to work on credit on a Sunday afternoon to defend a man with accounts frozen on suspicion of bank fraud. He was going to drive around in that truck. He was going to try and use his cards at some gas station. He was going to get declined. He was going to feel the public humiliation he had tried to force on me in the privacy of my living room. And when the reality of his financial isolation became unbearable, he would have to come back. He would have to show his face before the only authority capable of unlocking the hell he had locked himself into. The water in the kettle began to boil, letting out a soft, steady whistle. I killed the heat, prepped the filter, poured the hot water over the ground coffee, and let the bitter, comforting aroma fill the kitchen, completely displacing the smell of sweat and fear Derek had left behind. I poured the steaming coffee into the clean mugs. I carried one to the table and set it in front of Caroline. Then I sat across from her, picked up a croissant, and took a small bite. Tomorrow would be Monday. The banks would open their doors to the public at 10 in the morning. I knew Richard Vance would be in his office with the cybersecurity report printed out on his glass desk. And I knew that Derek, without a dime in his pocket, and with the terror of a federal subpoena breathing down his neck, would have no choice but to show up at that branch. What Derek didn't know as he burned through his gas tank on the empty city streets was that I wasn't going to be waiting for him at my house. I was going to be sitting in the bank's waiting room, in my gray coat, with my hardcover notebook, ready to have the final conversation in front of the people who mattered. The net was already cast, and the fish, blinded by his own arrogance, was swimming straight for the bottom. Monday morning broke cold with that thick frost that leaves the grass white and crunching under your shoes, announcing that winter was right around the corner. I woke up at 6 on the dot, just as I have every day of my life for as long as I can remember. Routine has healing power. It anchors you to the ground when everything around you feels like an earthquake. I went to the kitchen, turned on the burner, and put the kettle on for coffee. The silence in the house was deep, but it was no longer a silence loaded with tension. It was loaded with resolution. Caroline had slept in her old bedroom, the same one she had before she married Derek. Last night, after her husband fled in his truck, my daughter had collapsed in the kitchen chair, crying until she ran out of tears. I let her let it out. I didn't feed her cliches, nor did I try to comfort her with white lies. I made her bed with clean sheets that smelled of lavender, and tucked her in like I did when she was a little girl with a fever. Sometimes the fever of the soul needs to be sweated out in a childhood bed. As the water heated up, I heard the creak of the wooden floorboards in the hallway. Caroline appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was wearing a light gray wool sweater of mine that was a little too big on her. Her eyes were puffy, and her hair was tied back in a messy bun. But her posture was different. She wasn't slouching anymore. There was a new straightness in her shoulders, the straightness of someone who has hit rock bottom and discovers the floor is solid. "Good morning, Mom," she said, her voice a little raspy from the crying the night before. She walked over and kissed me on the cheek, a gesture she hadn't done so naturally in years. "Good morning, sweetheart. Sit down. The water is almost ready. Did you manage to get any sleep?" "More than I thought," she admitted, sitting at the table and wrapping her hands around the empty mug I placed in front of her. "I woke up a couple of times expecting to hear the engine of Derek's truck, but he never came back. I checked my phone. I have 20 missed calls from him between 2 and 4 in the morning, and a ton of voicemails." I poured the first cup of coffee. I took a sip to make sure the temperature was right, and then poured the second one for her. "Did you listen to them?" I asked, sliding the steaming mug toward her. Caroline took the mug with both hands, seeking the heat of the ceramic. She shook her head slowly, staring down at the dark liquid. "No, and I'm not going to. It's always the same. First he yells, then he threatens, then he cries, and at the end, he blames everything on me, so I end up apologizing for the things he did wrong. I know the cycle by heart, Mom. I don't want to hear it anymore." I nodded in silence. The clarity with which she spoke filled me with a quiet pride. The spell was broken. "At 9:30 we are leaving for the bank, Caroline. Richard is waiting for me in his office before the doors open to the public. I want you to come with me not to defend me, but so you can hear with your own ears what the paperwork has to say. Numbers don't lie, they don't manipulate, and they don't throw tantrums." "I'm going with you," she replied, without hesitating for a second. We finished breakfast with the calm of people preparing for a hard day's work. I dressed with care. I put on a pair of classic-cut black dress pants, an immaculate white blouse, and my dark gray coat. I combed my hair in front of the bathroom mirror, ensuring not a single white hair was out of place. Appearance in the world of numbers and institutions is the first line of defense. If you walk in looking like a victim, they treat you like a victim. If you walk in looking like an auditor, they show you the books. I packed my hardcover notebook and my ID card into my rigid black leather bag. We left the house at 9:15. The morning air hit our faces, clearing away any remaining trace of sleepiness. We walked the 10 blocks that separated us from Main Street. The town was already in full swing. The metal roll-up doors of the shops were grinding upward, delivery trucks double-parked, and people rushed to get to work. Nobody paid attention to us. We were just an older woman and her daughter walking down the sidewalk, invisible to the eyes of the world, exactly how I liked to operate. We arrived at the bank branch at 9:30. The tinted glass doors for the general public were locked, and a small group of retirees was already lined up on the sidewalk waiting to cash their checks. I didn't join them. I walked toward the side service door, the one used by armored truck guards and senior staff. I pressed the discreet buzzer embedded in the granite wall. A few seconds later, the door popped open with an electronic buzz. A private security guard, in a spotless uniform, with his hand resting near his radio, poked his head out. "Good morning. The branch opens at 10, ma'am," he said with automatic courtesy, ready to shut the door in our faces. "Good morning. I am Eleanor. Manager Vance is expecting me." The guard blinked, checked a small notepad he pulled from his shirt pocket, and his attitude changed instantly. He pulled the door wide open, stepping aside. "Come on in, Miss Eleanor. Mr. Vance notified me of your arrival. I'll escort you upstairs." We stepped into the empty bank. The contrast with the street noise was absolute. Inside, the air conditioning held a steady chill, and the only sounds were the hum of computers booting up and the sporadic typing of tellers prepping their stations. We walked across the polished marble floor, passing rows of empty chairs until we reached the spiral staircase leading to the management offices. We climbed the steps. Caroline walked behind me, taking it all in with a certain apprehension. To her, the bank had always been a hostile place. A place where they told her her account was overdrawn or that her husband's credit card had been declined. For me, this was my turf. It was the exact same language of spreadsheets and balance sheets I spoke for 35 years at the co-op. Richard's office was at the end of the hall. It had glass walls that allowed a full view of the bank's main floor. It was a strategic position of absolute control. Richard was sitting behind his mahogany desk reading a blue folder. Seeing us arrive, he stood up immediately, buttoning his tailored gray suit jacket, and stepped out to greet us. "Eleanor, what a pleasure to see you despite the circumstances," he said, extending his hand with firmness and respect. His face reflected the same professional gravity I had taught him to cultivate when he was just a boy. "Good morning, Richard. Thank you for seeing us so early. This is my daughter, Caroline." Richard shook Caroline's hand with a kind smile meant to put her at ease. "A pleasure, Caroline. Please, come in and take a seat. I ordered coffee for us. It should be arriving shortly." We stepped into the office. The room smelled of freshly printed paper ink and clean leather. We sat in the two chairs facing the desk. Richard returned to his seat, shut the glass door, and opened the blue folder he had been reading. He pushed it gently across the wooden surface until it sat right in front of me. "This is the official report from the Central Network's Cybersecurity Department, issued last night at 8 p.m., Richard explained, folding his hands on the desk. "As you suspected, Eleanor, the maneuver was clumsy and left tracks everywhere. The system logged access to your pension account from an IP address corresponding to the mobile network of a device registered to Derek Vance." I opened the folder. The pages were full of code strings, serial numbers, and timestamps. But right in the middle of the page was a box highlighted in light gray that summarized the transaction. I didn't need my glasses to read the figure, $10 USD. Exactly $10 transferred at 1:45 p.m. on Sunday. I turned the folder so Caroline could see it. My daughter looked down at the paper. Her eyes scanned the printed lines. She saw her husband's name. She saw the exact time, the moment Derek was supposedly setting up the phone for my own good. Physical evidence stamped by a financial institution carries a crushing weight. It obliterates excuses and emotional manipulation in an instant. "This is an official document, Caroline," I told her quietly, never taking my eyes off her. "This is not my opinion. It's not your mother exaggerating. This is what he did behind your back and mine." Caroline swallowed hard. She traced the edge of the paper with her index finger, as if she needed to touch the proof to convince herself it was real. "What happens now, Richard?" my daughter asked, looking up at the manager with a firmness that pleasantly surprised me. Richard shifted in his chair, adopting his most institutional posture. "The Level 3 protocol freezes absolutely everything, Caroline. The Federal Reserve, under elder protection regulations, immobilizes the funds of the suspect device's owner to prevent stolen money from being laundered or converted into crypto assets. Derek Vance cannot pull cash from an ATM. He cannot use his credit cards. He cannot transfer balances from his digital wallets. He is isolated from the national financial system. And he could go to jail for this, she pressed without trembling. That depends entirely on your mother. The bank has already escalated the automated report to the district attorney's cybercrimes division. It's standard procedure. The DA will summon Eleanor in the coming days. If she ratifies that the transfer was made without her consent, the case moves to criminal court for attempted fraud and identity theft. If she declares it was a family misunderstanding, the case is archived, though your husband's accounts will take weeks to be unlocked due to internal bureaucratic processes. I looked at Richard. He held my gaze. We both knew I wasn't dropping any charges. I didn't come here to forgive. I came here to snap the trap shut. It was 10 minutes to 10. A bank employee stepped into the office carrying a tray with 3 mugs of steaming coffee and glasses of mineral water. We thanked her silently. I picked up my mug by the porcelain handle, feeling the comforting heat. I walked over to the glass wall of the office and looked down at the main floor. At 10 o'clock sharp, the main metal security grates rolled up with a heavy rumble, and the glass doors swung wide open. People began streaming in, forming orderly lines at the tellers and filling the chairs in the waiting area. The usual hum of a bank on a Monday morning filled the room, and then I saw him walk in. Derek crossed the bank doors like a cornered animal. He looked deplorable. He was wearing the same plaid shirt from Sunday, now completely wrinkled and stained with sweat at the armpits and down the back. His hair was greasy, plastered to his forehead, and he had deep, dark bags under his eyes, the telltale signs of a sleepless night, probably spent in the reclining seat of his truck. He walked with fast, erratic steps, looking around with a mix of fury and desperation. He went straight to the ATM vestibule, shoving past a young kid who was waiting his turn. He yanked a plastic card from his wallet and jammed it into the slot violently. He punched in his PIN. From the height of Richard's office, I couldn't see the screen, but I didn't need to. I watched as Derek slammed his closed fist against the metal keypad. The machine spat his card right back out, accompanied by a sharp, high-pitched beep of rejection. "He's here," I announced, keeping my eyes on the glass. Caroline stood up from her chair and stepped up beside me. Seeing the state her husband was in, she let out a heavy sigh, but made no move to go down and help him. Downstairs, Derek wasn't giving up. He took massive strides toward the customer service desks, completely ignoring the ticket dispenser for the queue. He planted himself in front of the desk of one of the account officers, a young woman who was helping an elderly couple. "I need you to unfreeze my accounts right now," Derek shouted. His voice echoed across the entire ground floor, making dozens of heads turn to look at him. Silence fell over the waiting area, broken only by the echo of his demand. "The ATM is rejecting my card. I have drafts due today." The account officer looked at him calmly, used to dealing with upset clients, though Derek's aggression was completely out of line. "Sir, please lower your voice. You need to pull a number and wait your turn." "I am not waiting for any turn. I am a VIP client at this bank. I have investments. Call the manager." "This is robbery," he bellowed, slamming his open palm against the wooden desk. The 2 seniors sitting across from the officer shrank back in their chairs, terrified. The security guard by the entrance started walking toward Derek, resting his hand on the radio clipped to his belt. It was time. The stage was set, the lights were on, and the audience was in their seats. I turned to Richard. "I believe it is time for the manager to attend to his VIP client," I said with an irony so fine it sliced the air. Richard nodded, walked out of the office, stepped up to the balcony railing and looked down. "Mr. Vance?" Richard called out. His manager's voice, deep and authoritative, cut across the open space of the bank, stopping the security guard dead in his tracks. "I must ask you to stop disrupting the public service area. If you have an issue with your accounts, come up to my office immediately." Derek snapped his head up. Seeing the manager, his face seemed to light up for a fraction of a second with the false hope that he was going to be treated with the privileges he thought he deserved. He adjusted the collar of his wrinkled shirt, shot a disdainful glare at the account officer, and walked toward the spiral staircase with long, arrogant strides. He climbed the steps quickly. Richard waited for him at the office door. "Come in, Vance. We have a lot to discuss," Richard said, stepping aside to let him through. Derek crossed the threshold of the office, gearing up to unleash his speech of complaints and legal threats. He opened his mouth to start yelling, but the words caught in his throat. He froze 6 feet from the door. Caroline and I were sitting in the chairs facing the desk. I was holding my coffee mug with both hands, leaning comfortably back against the seat. My daughter was right beside me, back straight, eyes locked forward. Derek's arrogance crumbled in an instant, replaced by absolute panic. He looked at Richard, then at me, then at Caroline, trying to process the perfect ambush he had just walked right into. What are you doing here?" he stammered, taking a step back, his back hitting the glass door Richard had just closed. "We came to check on my accounts, Derek," I replied with a glacial calm. "Just like you told me yesterday. The world changed. Everything is digital now. And since I am just an old woman who barely knows how to turn on the television, I figured it was best to come straight to the manager, so he could explain to me how these modern platforms work." Derek swallowed so hard his Adam's apple bobbed violently in his throat. The color drained from his face. He was trapped in a glass office in full view of the entire bank, with the manager who held the power to ruin him and with the woman he had tried to rob. "This is crazy," he mumbled, looking at Richard for an escape hatch. "Vance, listen to me. This is a family misunderstanding. My mother-in-law blew things out of proportion. I was just configuring her phone to help her with her bills. It was a system error. You have to lift the hold. I spent the night on the street because my cards declined at a hotel. I don't have the cash to buy a cup of coffee." Richard walked to his desk, stood behind his chair, and planted both hands on the wooden surface, leaning slightly forward. His posture was that of a judge about to hand down a sentence. "The Federal Reserve System does not make family errors, Vance," Richard said, his voice hard and strictly professional. "You attempted to link a retirement pension account to a personal digital wallet without authorization, and you executed a test transfer. That is called identity theft and attempted fraud. And considering the victim is a senior citizen, the law considers it an aggravating factor." "There was no fraud!" Derek shrieked desperation, shattering his facade completely. "It was $10. You can't ruin my life over $10. Caroline, tell them something. For the love of God, tell them I told you I was going to do this to help us." Derek took a step toward his wife, holding out his hands in supplication. It was pathetic. The man who yesterday felt like the king of the world in my living room was now begging for mercy in a bank office, wearing the same dirty clothes he had slept in. Caroline didn't flinch. She didn't lower her gaze like she used to. She looked him dead in the eye with a coldness she inherited from me, a coldness she was finally putting to use. "I am not going to defend you, Derek," my daughter said. Her voice was low but clear, without a single tremor. "I have spent 10 years defending you from your own failures. I've spent 10 years paying off your debts and putting up with your abuse in silence. Yesterday, you crossed a line there's no coming back from. You tried to rob my mother right to her face. So no, I am not going to tell them anything. You are going to have to fix this mess all by yourself." The impact of Caroline's words was devastating. Derek grabbed his head, pulling at his thinning hair, struggling to breathe as if the oxygen in the office had been sucked out. I used the silence to deliver my blow, a calculated, measured strike, returning every insult and every humiliation with perfect symmetry. I set my coffee mug down on the desk, the porcelain letting out a soft clink. I shifted in my chair, smoothed out invisible wrinkles on my black pants, and stared right at him. "The economy is wrecked, Derek," I said, using the exact same words he had spoken at my table on Sunday, with the exact same tone of smug superiority. "You have to know how to maneuver. But let's be honest, your methods don't even cover basic expenses anymore. And with your accounts frozen, your money is literally worth nothing." Derek looked at me in sheer terror. He recognized his own phrases. He recognized the poison he had injected into my home, now pumping back into his own veins. "I told you I didn't need help with my bank account," I continued relentless. But you insisted the mental load was too much for me. Well, Derek, I am freeing you from that mental load. Starting today, I will manage your financial future. I will decide when I drop the charges with the district attorney. I will decide when you get access to your cards back. And in the meantime, I assure you, you are going to forget what it's like having to go to the ATM to pull out bills, because you won't be able to pull out a single one. If you need cash for the grocery store, maybe Caroline will give you a little weekly allowance if you behave. The word allowance hung in the air of the executive office, heavy, crushing. It was the exact concept he had used to reduce me to an incapable child, repurposed now to seal his absolute ruin. "You are a monster," Derek whispered, backing up until he hit the glass wall again. The people on the ground floor were looking up, watching the silent spectacle of a cornered man. "No, Derek, I am just a 72-year-old grandmother who writes her passwords down in a hardcover notebook. And you are the financial expert who just lost everything because you didn't know who you were stealing from." Richard closed the blue folder in front of him with a sharp thud that sounded like a gavel drop. "Vance Bank Security is about to escort you to the exit," the manager announced, pointing at the door. "Your accounts will remain locked indefinitely until the DA issues a ruling. If you attempt to enter another branch in this network to cause a scene, we will call the police immediately. I suggest you find yourself a good criminal defense attorney, assuming you can find one who works for free." "Get out of my office." Derek didn't protest. He didn't yell. The fight had completely drained from his body. He was hollowed out, humiliated in front of his wife, in front of the manager, and in front of all the customers watching from downstairs. He lowered his head, pushed the glass door open with shaking hands, and stepped out into the hall. We watched him walk down the spiral staircase, slowly dragging his feet, with the security guard trailing 2 steps behind him. He walked through the main bank doors and vanished into the street, swallowed up by the city, turned into a ghost, without a dime to his name. Silence returned to the office. Caroline let out the breath she had been holding and rubbed her face, wiping away the cold sweat of the tension. "It's over, Mom," she said with a mix of exhaustion and profound relief. I pulled my hardcover notebook out of my bag, flipped to a blank page, and took out a black ink pen. "Not yet, sweetheart," I replied, writing today's date in the top right corner of the paper. "Now we have to organize how you are going to get your things out of that apartment before nightfall. There is a lot of work to do, and the week has just begun." I slipped the black pen into the inner pocket of my bag and snapped the hardcover notebook shut with a firm motion. The sound of the pressed cardboard clapping together was the only signal that the meeting had adjourned. Richard Vance watched us from the other side of his mahogany desk. His posture remained strictly professional, but in his eyes there was a gleam of deep respect, the same respect he showed me 20 years ago when I walked into his office to audit the co-op's loans. I stood up, smoothing the creases of my dark pants. Caroline did the same beside me. My daughter wasn't shaking anymore. The sight of her husband begging for mercy and being escorted out by bank security had acted as a lightning-fast antidote to the fear that had paralyzed her for the last decade. "Thank you for your time, Richard," I said, extending my hand across the desk, "and for acting with the speed the situation required. Institutions only work when the people running them have the courage to apply the rules without exceptions." Richard shook my hand firmly. His grip was warm and steady. "You have nothing to thank me for, Eleanor. You taught me that numbers are the only defense against charlatans. The bank's legal department will maintain the Level 3 lockdown until the district attorney issues a resolution. Derek Vance won't be able to move a single cent, not even to pay for a bus fare. I will mail a certified copy of the cybersecurity report to your home address, in case you need it for any further proceedings." "That sounds perfect. Have an excellent week." We left the executive office and walked toward the spiral staircase. From the top, I took one last look at the bank's main floor. The lines of customers were moving normally. The clatter of keyboards and dot matrix printers filled the air, and the security guard had returned to his post by the front door. The disruption Derek had tried to cause had already been absorbed and neutralized by the institutional machinery. He was a discarded problem, a calculation error the system had already purged. We walked down the marble steps and stepped out into the street. The cold morning air greeted us with an invigorating slap. The sun had climbed higher, illuminating the canopies of the sycamore trees lining the avenue, but the chill of the looming winter still cut to the bone. We walked in silence for half a block, moving away from the bank's tinted glass doors. "Mom," Caroline said, breaking the silence, her voice still a little raspy. "When you said we had to organize getting my things out of the apartment, were you serious? Like today?" I stopped on the corner right in front of the taxi stand and turned to face her. Her eyes reflected a mix of anxiety and urgency. "Half measures are food for parasites, Caroline. Derek walked out of that bank with no money, no cards, and no dignity. His first instinct will be to seek shelter in the only place he still thinks he holds power, your apartment. He's going to try and barricade himself in. He's going to try and use your things, your clothes, your furniture, as hostages to force you into negotiating. We are not going to give him that opportunity. By the time he manages to find someone to lend him money to get back, you won't be there anymore." I reached into my leather bag and pulled out the old phone, the rugged brick with the physical keys I had used the day before to call Richard. I scrolled through the contacts saved on the internal memory with patience. I found the number I was looking for. Oscar, a former truck driver, a man who now ran private freight jobs with an old but impeccably maintained Ford F-150. I hit the green call button and brought the phone to my ear. It rang twice. "Miss Eleanor?" Oscar's deep, gravelly voice answered, backed by the rumble of a running engine. "Good morning, Oscar. I need an urgent moving service right now. It's a quick job. Just boxes, suitcases, and clothes. No heavy furniture or appliances. Are you available?" "For you always, ma'am. I'm dropping off some freight at the lumber yard on the highway, but I'll be done in 10 minutes. Tell me where I'm heading." I gave him the address of Caroline's apartment, a 3-story brick building about 20 blocks from downtown. We agreed on an hourly rate and I hung up. I dropped the phone back in my bag and waved down the first cab in the line. "Get in, sweetheart. We have work to do." The cab ride was short. Caroline stared out the window, watching the streets of her own city, as if seeing them for the first time. We pulled up to the exposed brick building. I paid the fare with small bills I always keep in a separate coin purse. We stepped out of the car and stood in front of the tempered glass front door. Caroline pulled her keys from her gray sweater pocket. Her hands weren't shaking. She slid the key into the lock, turned the cylinder, and pushed the door open. We climbed the stairs to the second floor. The hallway was dim lit, only by a small window at the far end of the corridor. Opening the apartment door, we were hit by a stale smell. It was a mix of the expensive, sweet cologne Derek overused, layered over the scent of closed windows and unwashed laundry. The place was exactly how they had left it Sunday morning. The bed unmade, a pair of leather dress shoes kicked off in the middle of the living room, and a dirty coffee mug sitting on the coffee table. "Get the suitcases out of the closet, Caroline, and find some heavy-duty trash bags for the shoes and coats. Don't waste time folding anything too neatly. Just empty your shelves." My daughter nodded and marched toward the master bedroom. I stayed in the living room, taking in the space. The apartment was small, but Caroline had decorated it with effort. The curtains, the throw pillows, the framed prints on the wall, all of it had been bought with her pharmacy paycheck. Derek had only contributed a massive flat-screen television that clashed with the rest of the furniture and swallowed up almost the entire main wall. I went into the kitchen, opened the pantry drawers looking for the cardboard boxes Caroline usually saved after grocery runs. I found 3 medium-sized boxes folded up behind the trash can. I popped them open quickly, reinforcing the bottoms with packing tape I found in a toolbox. I carried the boxes into the bedroom. Caroline had already pulled out 2 large canvas suitcases and was throwing her clothes inside with fast, almost frantic movements. She was breathing heavy. She was exercising 10 years of submission with every garment she yanked off a hanger. "Mom," she said, suddenly stopping in her tracks. She was crouched in front of the nightstand on Derek's side of the bed. She had opened the bottom drawer looking for some winter scarves she thought she'd stored there at the end of last season. I walked over to her. Caroline was holding a stack of papers bound by a rubber band. The edges of the papers bore the red stamps and logos of collection agencies. "What is that, sweetheart?" She handed me the stack. I slid my reading glasses on and reviewed the documents. The first page was an eviction notice from the law firm managing the building. It was dated 3 weeks ago. It cited a debt of 4 consecutive months of unpaid HOA fees, plus 3 months of unpaid rent. The second document was a repossession notice from the auto dealership. It demanded the immediate surrender of Derek's truck for defaulting on 6 consecutive payments, warning that a commercial court had already issued an active seizure order for the vehicle. Caroline covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of a deep, purifying rage. He asked me for the money every single month. He told me he was going to pay the rent and the fees in cash because the management company gave him a discount. He took half my paycheck to pay the truck loan. He kept it all. We were going to get evicted next week, and he didn't say a word to me. I looked at the papers. The evidence of the disaster was absolute. Derek wasn't just a blowhard chasing magic investments. He was a domestic con artist who had been parasitizing his own wife until he pushed her to the brink of legal destitution. I folded the papers carefully and slid them into my pants pocket. "Listen to me very carefully, Caroline," I said, taking her face in my hands, forcing her to look me in the eye. "This is the very last time you are going to cry over this man's lies. Do you understand me? The last time. These papers are the definitive proof that your leaving this house is not abandonment of the home. It is an emergency evacuation. Now pack your things. Leave his shirts, leave his shoes, leave his television. Take only what you bought with the sweat of your own brow." She nodded, wiping her tears with the sleeve of the sweater. The rage gave her a new surge of energy. In less than 40 minutes, we had filled the 2 suitcases, the 3 cardboard boxes, and 4 heavy-duty trash bags with all her clothes, her books, her toiletries, and the few items of sentimental value she owned. The blast of the hoarse horn from Oscar's F-150 echoed up from the street. I looked out the window. The old, reliable truck was double-parked with its hazards flashing. We hauled the stuff down in 3 trips. Oscar helped us load the bags and suitcases into the truck bed, arranging them with the exact same precision he used to stack seed bags in the co-op warehouses. He didn't ask any questions. Men of his generation know how to read a situation without needing an explanation. Before pulling the apartment door shut for the last time, Caroline stopped in the doorway. She looked at the empty space, the open closets, the unmade bed. She pulled her keyring out of her pocket, waited in her hand for a second, and then walked over to the coffee table in the living room. She dropped the keys onto the wood right next to Derek's dirty coffee mug. She walked out into the hall and pulled the door shut. The deadbolt clicked into place with a metallic, definitive sound. We climbed into the cab of Oscar's truck. The engine roared, and we pulled away from the building. I watched my daughter out of the corner of my eye. She was staring out the window, but this time there was no anxiety on her face. There was a massive peace. The peace of someone who has just dropped a cinder block they'd been carrying on their back for years. Time, when cleared of emotional garbage, starts moving with astonishing clarity. The following weeks were an exercise in methodical reconstruction. Caroline settled back into her childhood bedroom. At first, she slept 12 hours straight, reclaiming the rest that nervous tension had stolen from her for years. Then, slowly, she started rebuilding her routines. She went back to her job at the pharmacy without the crushing weight of having to hand her money over to a husband who vaporized it. She started buying groceries for the house, cooking with me on the weekends, bringing the color back to her cheeks and the spark back to her voice. Derek vanished from our immediate orbit, but in a large town where everyone knows everyone, failure makes just as much noise as faked success. One afternoon, almost 3 weeks after the incident at the bank, I walked down to the newsstand on Main Street to buy the Sunday paper. Arthur was behind the metal counter organizing some candy displays. When he saw me, his eyes lit up with that specific spark of someone holding fresh information they desperately need to share. "Good afternoon, Miss Eleanor. Good to see you." He greeted me, leaning his elbows on the counter and dropping his voice instinctively. "You'll never guess who I saw yesterday afternoon." "Good afternoon, Arthur. Judging by your tone, someone who isn't having a very good time." Arthur let out a dry laugh. "Your son-in-law, Derek, or ex-son-in-law, I should say. I saw him at the gas station out by the highway near the toll booth. I'd gone to fill up my son's car. The boy looked like a wreck. He was on foot wearing a dirty jacket and worn-out shoes. Turns out he tried to buy a bag of coffee and a soda inside the mini-mart. Tried to pay with his phone, using one of those modern apps. The machine declined it 3 times. The cashier told him the account popped up as frozen by court order. I didn't show any surprise. I pulled out the exact change for the newspaper and set the bills on the counter. Financial institutions are ruthless when they detect irregularities, Arthur. Ruthless is putting it lightly, Eleanor. The gas station attendant told me that last week a tow truck showed up with an order from commercial court and repossessed that massive truck he used to drive. They found him sleeping inside it, parked in a vacant lot near the municipal yard. They made him get out with nothing but the clothes on his back and towed the vehicle away for defaulting on the loan. Now they're saying he's sleeping on a mattress on the floor of a buddy's auto shop because the cops kicked him out of the apartment he was renting for not paying the HOA fees. I nodded slowly. Derek's financial collapse was the natural consequence of a castle built on lies, maxed-out credit cards, and other people's money. By cutting off his access to my pension, the only source of actual liquidity he had left, the castle had collapsed right on top of his head. I felt no pity. I felt the calm of someone watching gravity work exactly as it should. You reap what you sow, Arthur. Keep the change. I resumed my walk home with the newspaper tucked under my arm. The next day, the mailman dropped a brown envelope in my mailbox. It was an official summons from the district attorney's office. The automated cybersecurity report had followed its bureaucratic course, and the assigned prosecutor was requesting my presence to ratify the complaint for attempted fraud and identity theft. I showed up at the DA's office on a Tuesday morning. The building was old, with peeling paint and hardwood floors that creaked underfoot. The smell of old paper stamp ink and reheated coffee triggered the third recurring image from my past. A crystal-clear flashback to my early years at the co-op, back when Robert, my husband, was still alive. I remember he came with me once to City Hall to file a formal complaint against an inspector who was shaking us down for bribes to approve a new warehouse. I was nervous, doubting whether I should hand over the accounting ledgers. Robert put a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder and said, "Eleanor, documented truth is a stone wall. Liars can scream all they want, but they're just going to split their heads open if they try to run through it. Show your papers." That memory was my shield as I waited in the hallway of the DA's office. They called me into a cramped office cluttered with case files stacked on the floor. The prosecutor, a man in his 50s with glasses sliding down his nose, looked at me over his folders. "Mrs. Eleanor, we are here regarding the cybersecurity report from the Federal Reserve. The system indicates that from a device registered to Derek Vance, an attempt was made to link your retirement pension account and an unauthorized transfer was executed. Mr. Vance submitted a statement via a public defender claiming it was a family mistake, an attempt to help you with technology that you misinterpreted. Do you ratify that this was an attempted fraud without your consent?" I didn't hesitate for a single second. I pulled the hardcover notebook from my bag, flipped to the page where I kept my original passwords, and took out the certified copy of the report Richard Vance had mailed me. "Mr. Prosecutor, I was the treasurer of an agricultural co-op for 35 years. I managed payrolls for 100 employees and multi-million-dollar balance sheets. I do not misinterpret technology or numbers. Mr. Vance physically took my phone from me in my own home, changed my security credentials, violating my privacy, and built a financial bridge to his personal account to drain my funds. It was not a mistake. It was premeditated theft. I ratify the complaint in its entirety." The prosecutor looked me in the eye. He saw the ice in my posture, the clarity of my words, and the flawless documentation I placed on his desk. He nodded, picked up a pen, and signed the ratification document. "We will proceed with formal charges for aggravated financial fraud, ma'am. The defendant's bank accounts will remain under preventative seizure until the trial concludes. Have a good day." I walked out of the DA's office with the absolute certainty that the padlock was shut forever. 6 months passed since that morning at the bank. Winter was left behind, giving way to a bright spring that made the lemon tree in the backyard explode with green leaves. Sunday routines in my house went back to being the same as always, but with one vital difference. The tension had vanished, replaced by a harmony you could breathe in the air. It was a Sunday at noon. The sun was pouring through the kitchen window. I was sitting at the head of the table, watching Caroline. My daughter was standing at the counter, prepping the rub for the roast. She chopped the garlic and parsley with quick dexterity, pouring the olive oil with precision. She was wearing a white apron and had her hair tied back. Her posture was straight, her face was relaxed, and she was humming an old song playing softly on the radio. A month ago, using the savings she had managed to build up after she stopped paying Derek's debts, Caroline had bought herself a used car, a compact, economical model with a few scratches on the paint but running perfectly. The car keys sat on the table next to a vase of flowers, shining like a trophy of her reclaimed independence. "Mom, should I put a little rosemary on the potatoes?" Caroline asked, turning toward me with a smile. "Put it on, sweetheart. Rosemary gives roasted potatoes a rustic touch that works beautifully." The lunch passed in absolute peace. There were no exaggerated engine noises out on the street. There were no doors slamming open. There were no complaints about the heat, no empty speeches about magic investments. We ate the tender roast beef. We talked about the pharmacy inventory and the tomato seedlings we were going to plant in the garden next week. After lunch, Caroline took care of washing the dishes. I stood up from the table, kissed her on the forehead, and retreated to my bedroom. The house was quiet, a protective, thick, and gentle silence. I walked into my room. The afternoon sun illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. I walked over to the heavy oak wardrobe, pulled the heavy door open, and reached for the old shoebox tucked behind the winter blankets. The box that smelled of mothballs and stored time. I sat on the edge of my bed with the box on my lap. I lifted the worn cardboard lid. Inside rested my original ID card, the gold debit card from my secret account, and my hardcover notebook. I pulled out the notebook and fished the black ink pen I always carry out of my coat pocket. I opened the notebook and flipped to the section in the back, the pages where I used to log extraordinary expenses and problems to solve. I turned the pages slowly, listening to the rustle of the paper. I reached the page where 6 months ago I had written the name Derek Vance, followed by the date of that fateful Sunday and the word problem. I stared at the page for a few seconds. I listened to the sound of running water in the kitchen, the dull clink of clean plates being stacked in the drying rack by my daughter's hands. The hands of a free woman. I uncapped the pen, pressed the ballpoint tip against the paper, and with a firm, slow, and absolutely precise motion, I drew a thick, definitive black horizontal line, crossing out my ex-son-in-law's name from edge to edge. I blew on the fresh ink for a moment. I closed the hardcover notebook, placed it back inside the shoebox, laid the gold card on top, and put the lid back on. I stood up from the bed. I placed the box back on the top shelf behind the blankets and pushed the oak door shut. The brass latch clicked into place with a sharp, tiny, perfect sound, sealing the matter forever in the silence of my room. Before we dive deep into our reflections, please remember that the story shared today is purely for educational and inspirational purposes, designed to spark meaningful thoughts on how we treat one another and how we navigate personal boundaries. This powerful narrative leaves us with a profound reminder that true strength never needs to raise its voice. We live in a fast-paced era where loud arrogance is often mistaken for confidence, but real power lies in quiet wisdom, preparation, and knowing your own worth. The story of Eleanor teaches us that boundaries are not just emotional walls. They are necessary acts of self-love and absolute protection against those who seek to exploit us. When we encounter manipulation, our greatest weapon is not anger, but unshakable clarity and undeniable truth. It breaks my heart to see how easily financial and emotional abuse can hide behind the guise of helping, especially when aimed at our vulnerable elders or those who simply love too much. Yet there is a beautiful, redeeming light in this tale regarding the awakening of a daughter who finally chooses her own dignity over a toxic illusion. We must learn to support our loved ones not by fighting their battles with screaming matches, but by showing them the undeniable reality so they can find the courage to walk away. Respect is not an outdated concept. It is the very foundation of any healthy relationship. If someone constantly diminishes your capabilities or attempts to strip away your independence, they are not protecting you. They are controlling you. Applying this to our own lives means maintaining our autonomy, keeping our records straight, and never allowing anyone to convince us that we are suddenly useless or obsolete. Silence and perfect documentation will always outlast empty threats. We must also cultivate compassion for those trapped in cycles of emotional abuse, offering them a safe harbor and undeniable truth rather than harsh judgment. Ultimately, life naturally purges those who build their castles on deceit, while those who stand firmly on integrity will always weather the storm. Let this story inspire you to protect your inner peace, safeguard your independence, and foster relationships built on mutual respect rather than exploitation. May we all possess the quiet courage to turn our personal struggles into masterclasses of resilience and grace. Disclaimer: the content, reflections, and scenarios discussed are for informational and educational purposes only and do not constitute professional legal or financial advice. Listeners should consult with certified professionals regarding their specific personal, financial, or legal circumstances.